We lived in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind where the streets are lined with big trees and families leave their porch lights glowing until late. Growing up there, I never imagined that anything really strange or dangerous could happen. But I'd always had odd sleeping problems, especially when it rained. Most people say the sound of rainfall helps them drift off, but for me, it was just constant noise that kept my mind racing. Silence was the only thing that helped me sleep. Even the gentle blow of a fan or the ticking of a clock could keep me awake. When it rained, it was like every drop of water tapping on my window was a tiny reminder that I wouldn't be able to rest. This night was one of those. It had been raining since early evening, soft at first, then picking up until it was a steady patter against the roof and the sidewalk outside. I tossed and turned for hours, watching the blurry shadows of tree branches swaying against my walls. The rain just kept coming, and I felt more awake than ever. At some point after midnight, I finally gave up on sleep. I could tell both my parents were fast asleep. Their bedroom door was closed, and only a thin strip of yellow light peeked out from beneath. I crept down the hall, pulled on my raincoat, grabbed a hat, and quietly slipped outside. I didn't take an umbrella, and I left my phone behind. I wanted to walk, to let the cold air and rain clear my head. Leaving our front porch, I walked out into the chilly air. The rain soaked my clothes almost right away, but it didn't bother me. There was something peaceful about how empty everything was. Streetlights made little pools of gold on the slick pavement. Cars were parked in neat lines, their windows fogged up from the wet night. I followed the sidewalk around our block, past little yards and hedges shining with rain. Across the street from our place, there was a park. It wasn't huge, but it had clusters of old trees, winding paths, a children's playground, and a few benches under big streetlights. At this hour, the park looked almost magical, empty but alive with the rain and the glow of the lights. My parents always said it was fine for me to be out there, even at night. We'd lived in that neighborhood for years, and nothing bad had ever happened. Sometimes other families took late walks or someone jogged through with a dog, but that night I was the only person out. I walked into the park, letting my mind wander. The branches dipped under the weight of water, sending big drops down onto the path. Everything smelled fresh and green, like the rain had washed the city clean. After about 15 or 20 minutes, I started to feel tired. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe the walk helped settle my nerves. Whatever the reason, I was ready to head home. I turned around and made my way toward the park entrance closest to our house. But as I got closer to the sidewalk that led out of the park, I noticed something strange. A long, dark shape lying right in the middle of the street ahead. It was so still at first, I thought it was just a branch knocked down by the wind, or maybe a bag someone left behind. But as I took a few more steps, I realized it was bigger than that. I stopped, my heart beating faster. I squinted through the rain, trying to figure out what it could be. Then, as a car passed by on a nearby street and its headlights swept across the road, I saw it clearly. A person, lying face down, arms out, legs stretched behind. Everything in my body went tense at that moment. I felt frozen, caught between worry and fear. It was late, it was raining hard, and someone was lying in the road. My first thought was that they'd been hurt. Maybe a car had hit them, or they'd passed out and needed help. But there were no cars nearby, and the whole street was completely empty. I remembered what my parents always told me about how important it was to help people if they were in trouble. Even though every part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, I couldn't help wondering if this person needed help. I walked slowly forward, calling out softly, "Are you okay?" There was no answer. The rain was so loud it felt like it swallowed up my voice. I could see now that the person was a man, dressed in dark, heavy clothes that looked soaked through. He wasn't moving. I started to take another step, still trying to convince myself that everything would be all right. But then, out of nowhere, a sound sliced through the quiet. It was so strange that I stopped in my tracks, like a high, echoing cry, like an animal in pain or someone shouting far away. It gave me chills. I spun around, peering into the park, looking for anything that could have made such a noise. But all I saw were tree trunks and shadows. When I turned back, something was different. The man in the street was no longer lying down. He was sitting up now, knees pulled up, staring directly at me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The rain kept falling, washing across the pavement and making everything shine. Then he stood. It was like watching someone wake up from a deep sleep, slow, careful, almost unsure. He looked right at me with this strange, empty expression. In his hand, I could see something glinting, a long, thin shape, like a kitchen knife. What happened next felt almost unreal. The man suddenly started running straight at me, raising the hand with the knife, a wide, crazed grin spreading across his face. He shouted something, 3 sharp words that echoed through the rain. "I'll kill you!" My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I spun around and took off, running into the trees, not thinking, just moving. My shoes skidded on the wet grass, branches scratched at my arms as I tried to find a place to hide. The pounding of my heart drowned out everything else. I kept running, not even sure if he was following. The only thing I could think was that I needed to get away, not lead him back to my house, not toward the street where my parents slept. I veered toward the thickest part of the park, past the playground and behind a big bush, then ducked behind the trunk of a wide old tree. I pressed myself against the bark, trying to control my breath. It's hard to say how much time passed. My jeans were soaked, my teeth chattered, and every twig snapping nearby made me jump. I kept listening for footsteps or that strange howl, but all I could hear was the rain and my own heavy breathing. After what felt like forever, maybe 25 minutes or more, I heard nothing but the drops hitting the leaves. Bit by bit, my panic began to fade. I tried to peek out from behind the tree. The park looked empty. I didn't see anyone moving toward me, and the man was nowhere in sight. Still, I took the safest way home I could think of, looping around the far edge of the park rather than risking the street. The rain felt colder now, but at least I didn't see that man again. Finally, I slipped through our backyard gate, crept inside through the back door, and hurried to my room. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, shaking, replaying everything that had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty street, the figure sitting up, and the flash of metal in his hand. I wondered where the man had gone, and if the strange howl had anything to do with what I had seen. Days afterward, I searched for an answer. Was he hurt? Was he waiting for someone else? Was it a bad dream, or had it really happened? It seemed too strange and random to be real. But the memory stuck with me. The sound of the rain, the feeling of dread as I ran through the trees, and that fear that sometimes you just run into something that doesn't make sense. People sometimes say that scary things only happen in places far away, in stories and in movies, but not in ordinary neighborhoods. But I learned that's not true. Sometimes one small detail, a rainy night, a deserted street, a figure lying just where you don't expect it, can stick with you for years. Our house looks the same today, and the park still sits right from where I live. Now, when it rains and I hear the drops at night, I stay in and keep my curtains closed. I walk by that park, but I don't go through it when it's dark anymore. And while I never saw that man again, I'm extra careful. Every time I hear a storm, the memory comes back, the lonely street, the frightening sound, and the man's empty look. I learned that some of the scariest stories are the ones that really happen, especially when you least expect them. Sometimes, when people ask if I've ever been truly scared, I wonder how much of that night I can ever put into words. Mostly, I just say that strange things happen, and it's best to pay attention to your instincts, even if it's just a feeling, even if you can't explain why you're afraid. I learned that the hard way, on a night when the rain refused to let me sleep. And every now and then, when thunderstorms roll across our neighborhood, I lay awake remembering those old trees, the empty road, and the lesson I've never forgotten. Some of the scariest stories are the ones that really happen, especially when you least expect them.
A few years ago, in the spring of 2019, it had been one of those gloomy months where it seemed to rain every day, the sky rarely breaking for sunlight. On this particular Sunday, I was home early from work, planning a lazy evening with nothing but TV and hot drinks. The storm outside was steady enough that I never expected anyone to come by at all. So when I heard a knock at the door, barely loud enough to be heard over the rain, I was more than surprised. It was strange for anyone to come all the way out this far without calling first. When I opened the door, there was a man standing there, maybe around his late 20s, rain dripping from his hair. He wasn't dressed for the weather and looked worn out. He told me he'd been camping in the woods nearby and got himself into a rough spot. He needed somewhere to stay for the night. With how isolated my property is, I could understand, in theory, why someone in trouble might show up on my porch. There really wasn't another house for miles in any direction. Still, opening your door to a stranger on a rainy night is never easy. My mind went through every possible risk, but I tried to keep my nerves hidden. "Need to make a phone call?" I asked, hoping to help him get a ride to town. He simply shook his head and said he'd be all right, but he couldn't crash at my place. With that, he turned away, disappearing down my muddy driveway, then veering into the woods without another word. It was odd, but before long I'd gone back to my spot on the couch, trying to let the moment drift away like so many other strange little things that happen when you live away from the city. I figured that was the end of it. Hours passed, the rain fell even harder, and the light outside faded. I was just about to call it a night when something caught my eye, a flicker of orange through the window out back. I moved the curtain aside and peered out. Through the blur of water and darkness, I spotted a tiny campfire burning under a tall tree just inside the woods, close enough that I could make out the silhouette of someone standing there. I couldn't tell if the person was facing toward my home or out deeper into the trees. My stomach tightened. The nearest neighbors were a long hike away, and strangers weren't common in these woods. After a few seconds, I closed the curtain and picked up my phone. I called the local police to report an unknown person camping so close to my house, explaining the situation and asking if someone could come by and check it out. Out here, I knew it could take a while before anyone arrived. I hung up, glanced outside again, and noticed the campfire was dying down, but I no longer saw the person. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of slow, heavy footsteps squishing through the drenched earth toward my house. I ran to another window and watched him come into view, this time clearly holding a rifle as he moved through the yard. Then he vanished from sight as he rounded the corner. A sharp pounding noise followed as he banged on my front door. The knocks were so forceful they rattled the wood. Heart pounding, I dashed to the hall closet, got my own self-defense handgun, and crouched low by the wall near the entryway, trying to stay calm. Another crash hit the door. This time it sounded like he was using his rifle to try and break it in. The thunder of the rain mixed with my pulse. All I could think was, this was my last chance to scare him off before things got any worse. I aimed toward the edge of the doorframe and fired a warning shot. The crack of the gun echoed through the rooms, drowning out everything else for a moment. The only sound left after was the unending rain. Several minutes ticked by. I counted each second in silence, listening desperately for footsteps, voices, anything. But nothing came. Gathering every bit of courage I could, I checked the pee-hole, my hand still shaking. The porch was empty. Outside, deep footprints led away from the stairs, vanishing off into the mud. The police arrived over an hour later and searched around. Out where the fire had burned, they found something chilling: a duffel bag, half buried and recently dug up. Inside, there was a collection of tools and rope, things people usually describe as a burglary kit, or even worse, as the kind of bag someone might hide for an attack. They explained that it likely had been hidden in the woods beside my house hours or even days before that night. That discovery made everything feel colder, more calculated. Someone had scouted my place, planned their approach, and then waited for a stormy night to try whatever they were going to do. As for why he picked my house or what his true intentions were, nobody could say. The police checked the area and kept their investigation open, but the man was gone, leaving just a trail of questions no one could answer, and no sign of him ever turned up again. I still live in that same quiet little house, but everything feels different now. Even years later, whenever the rain starts pouring and night falls extra dark and heavy, I find it hard not to wonder if someone is watching from the edge of the woods, waiting for another chance. And every strange noise or sudden shadow puts me right back into that uneasy feeling from that night, a reminder that out here, help is farther away than we think, and sometimes you really are on your own.
It was early April, and the rain just wouldn't stop. I work a job that keeps me busy indoors sometimes, but also outdoors a lot. When it's raining, that part is extra tough, and by the time my shift ends, I'm usually wiped out. This day felt pretty much like any other rainy workday. I finished work around 6 p.m. and started the half-hour drive back to my home. It's tucked away in a quiet, rural part of town, far enough out that the roads get muddy easily when it rains. As I pulled down my driveway, which by now was just a slippery mess of mud from the weather, I noticed something strange: a set of tire tracks I hadn't seen before. These tracks showed that another car had driven all the way down to my house recently. At first, I didn't think too much about it, figuring maybe it was the mail truck or someone making a quick delivery. But something felt off, because when I walked to the door, there was no mail or package waiting for me. Not only that, but from the way the tracks looped near the house, it looked like the car had turned around with a three-point turn and left, almost like whoever drove it had made a wrong turn and didn't stop to knock or ring the doorbell. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe some delivery driver just got confused. I went inside, peeled off my soaked work clothes, and headed to the kitchen to throw something together for dinner. The house was warm and quiet, except for the soft patter of the rain tapping the windows. Around 7:30, maybe while my dinner was cooking or just after, I thought I heard a knock. It was just one knock, quiet and short, almost drowned out by the rain and wind blowing against the house. I got up from the living room and carefully walked over to the front door, on the other side of the house. I opened the door wide, and a rush of cold rain and wind hit me right in the face. But as I looked out, nothing. No one was waiting on the porch, nowhere to be seen. I glanced to my left and then right, scanning the wet driveway and the yard, but it was empty. Maybe it was just the storm messing with my ears or the sound of rain hitting metal nearby. I closed the door, trying to tell myself I was overthinking things, and went back to the couch. I turned the TV back on and scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. Nothing odd happened for about an hour. Then I got up to use the bathroom. Walking back through the living room, I noticed something weird. On the white tile floor behind my couch, which faces away from the front door and TV, there was a small smear of mud or dirt. It stood out a lot because the floor was otherwise spotless. I know for sure I hadn't tracked mud into the house. I never wear shoes inside, especially when they're soaked and covered in mud from the driveway or outside. Plus, the spot was behind the couch where I wouldn't see it unless I specifically looked in that exact spot. I grabbed a rag and wiped it up, but the feeling of something being off kept creeping in. My mind jumped to all kinds of ideas like, what if someone had been in my house while I was outside or at work? But I tried to shake that thought. It felt like my imagination was just getting the best of me. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched from somewhere I couldn't see. The couch was perfectly placed in the room so that the whole bottom floor of the house was behind me while I sat there. That empty space made the feeling worse, like something could be hiding just out of sight. I figured the best thing to do would be to get out of there and into my bedroom upstairs. At least there, the bed was backed by a wall and I could see the door. It was a safer feeling, even though sometimes that feeling is all in your head. I took my phone and a small TV upstairs and settled in the room. After a while, I was slowly starting to feel better, maybe even a little sleepy. Suddenly, I heard a noise. Not loud, but enough to snap me back to alertness. It was a soft thump, like a footstep or something brushing against the wall just outside my bedroom door. My heart skipped. I stood up and put my ear right to the door to listen. Nothing, except the rain and distant storm sounds. I waited, but no second noise came. I told myself I needed to check and make sure I was okay. So I turned the knob and opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. Feeling brave but still uneasy, I decided to check the rest of the house for any signs something was wrong. Upstairs, the only other room was a spare bedroom, mostly a quiet place with old books and some unused furniture. As I started down the hall toward that room, suddenly my TV downstairs flipped on by itself. The volume blasted out my show at full loudness, sending a shock right through my chest. My first thought was pure panic. How could that happen? Who could have turned the TV on? I sprinted down the hall 2 steps at a time and hurried downstairs. I found the living room dark, except for the blue flicker of the TV screen lighting the walls. I scanned every corner carefully, expecting to see someone hiding, but there was no one there at all. I walked over and manually switched off the TV, but the fear stayed with me. Was it a glitch, or was someone trying to scare me? I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter just to feel a bit safer and began searching the entire first floor. I checked every room one by one. Nothing out of place, no hidden person, no sign of forced entry around the house. Still, my heart didn't calm. I slowly made my way back upstairs, telling myself maybe this was just a weird series of events, nothing malicious. That's when I opened the door to the spare bedroom and froze. Lying right there on the floor by the closet was the remote control for the downstairs TV. My hands started shaking. How did that get there? I just used that remote and I know it was on the kitchen table a little while ago. Suddenly, it hit me. Someone was inside the house, maybe even while I was downstairs cooking or sitting on the couch. I didn't stick around to think any longer. I ran down the stairs, rushed out the front door into the rain, and called the police. When they arrived, they found signs that confirmed my worst fears. The lock on one of the downstairs windows was broken, probably how whoever it was had gotten inside earlier that day. They probably came by while I was at work, maybe knocking on the door to see if I was home. When they realized I wasn't, they left, probably driving away and then returning later to break in and stay inside without me knowing. They had been moving around quietly all night, maybe watching me from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. The fact that the TV suddenly turned on and blared so loud was probably a distraction, something to pull my attention so I could hide or slip out unnoticed. What chills me the most is that nothing was stolen. There were no signs of robbery or violence, no objects missing or broken, just a feeling like someone had been lurking there, watching without being seen. Since then, I can't look at my house the same way anymore. Every little noise or shadow makes me jump now. I always double-check the locks and windows before bed. Sometimes I wonder what their plan was, or what could have happened if I hadn't noticed the muddy spot or the remote left in the spare room. This experience taught me that danger doesn't always come with loud noises or obvious signs. It sometimes hides in the small, quiet things you almost ignore. The single knock, a muddy footprint, or a remote left in the spare room.